Hello, everyone. It is so great to be with you. Um, Welcome to Planetary Gig Talk Live. I'm Jefferson Glassie, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gigs Society, whose mission is creating unity through music, but as I like to say, making connections through music with the intention of bringing peace. I'm so excited about this session today. This is something kind of brand new for me, but not for a lot of people. We have an amazing panel of folks and now a whole bunch of people here as well. So the name of our session today is, hold on, admitting people, more people. The name of our session today is When the Drummers Were Women, A Spiritual History of Rhythm, the book by Layne Redmond. A discussion of the role of women as the primary percussionists throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and beyond, and what this means for us today. And I'm still admitting people.
And everyone, we're so glad you're here. Thank you for switching over to the Zoom call. I'm Barbara Gail. Please be sure to mute yourself and help our moderator out here by muting yourself and taking yourself off screen. Thanks for adapting to this situation. Sorry, the Facebook Live did not work.
Yeah, I'll take blame for that. The buck stops here, right here in these mountains.
Jefferson, if you want to make me, it's Miranda, a co-host, I can let people in.
Oh, there you go. Boy, I tell you, it takes a community, doesn't it? Let me just find you here. I can do that.
You know how to do it? You press the three dots on the far right of my name.
Right.
I see you here. Hold on.
1, 2.
Let me
co-host. Good thinking. You're on top of it.
I'm just doing this so you can see me.
Yep. No, I got you. Did you get co-host?
I didn't get it.
You didn't get it.
Thanks for bearing with us, everybody.
Okay. I think I got it.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, back to where we were. First, I'd like to introduce Krista Holland. Krista is a frame drum expert. Somebody needs to mute. Multidisciplinary teacher, historian, mythologist, and the founder of Sacred Drumming Academy, where she shares her in-depth training and studies of a cross-cultural art form and history of the frame drum, and teaches the frame drum as an instrument and tool for sacred practice, meditation, sound healing, and the transformation of consciousness and culture. She studied with Layne Redmond, as did Barbara Gail. Barbara, thank you so much for being with us. Barbara is described as a dynamic alchemist in the teaching arts of rhythm and movement. She and her husband, Jeff Hanna, together owned and operated the Rhythm Inlet and the Ukulele Place in Florida from 2005 until recently. She's a performer and presenter, an accomplished hand drummer, dancer, percussionist, children's edutainer, spirit singer, and well-seasoned facilitator of group drum and dance experiences in the ceremonial to the celebratory. And my friend and the amazing Roy Futureman Wooten. Roy is the 5-time Grammy winner with Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. We've done many programs together, and it's just an honor to have him here. They don't call him Futureman for nothing. That's what I say. So let me just give a quick intro as to why we're here.
Hang on one second. We still have some people who are not muted, Jefferson. There's lots of shuffling around. So everybody, you just need to mute yourself. And
Miranda may be able to mute some people too.
If you can go to chat, mute all, Jefferson. We just have to unmute.
Yeah, and then unmute each person who's going to speak. How's that? Right. Just mute all.
Yeah. Just mute all.
Go to participants and mute all.
Yeah, I think it's. On the chat.
Okay.
Maybe on the chat.
Then I may have to ask you to unmute. But this is a big experiment.
Yes, no problem.
Mute all. All right. And now yeah, Krista's going to unmute too. Well, good. Okay. So we really Planetary Gig Society is an effort to explore the power of music, talk about the power of music, promote the power of music, so that we can try to have a better society. And in founding Planetary Gig Society, I really was influenced by Roy's brother Victor, his books, the Music Lesson, The Spirit of Music, in understanding, wow, music is not just some guys playing a gig over here. Music is really a powerful path to peace. And recently, in the course of doing research for a book, I came upon, I mean, you always learn when you write things, but I came upon Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer and learned quite a bit about indigenous cultures, the gift economy, the gratitude economy, and, you know, the matriarchal aspects of indigenous people. And that led me to some amazing books by Heidi Gettner Abendroth, Societies of Peace, Matriarchies Past, Present, and Future, Matriarchal Societies, another book, very in-depth book. And I began to learn, wow, things weren't always the way that they are now. Things were different before. And then my good friend, wonderful friend, Linda Helms told me about When the Drummers Were Women by Layne Redmond. And it just, my head sort of exploded. I thought, we really need to have a conversation about this. And reached out, Miranda Rondeau. I found her on the internet. She introduced me to Krista and Barbara. And I always thought that Roy would be a great part of this conversation. And so we just would really like to hear, I think Krista was going to go first, right? Could you tell us about the book, about Layne, what it means? It's just so profound, so important. There's so many lessons and so many amazing things that I think can help us all. When I say all, I mean all the relatives around the world.
Thank you, Jefferson, and thank you for gathering us all to talk about Drummers Were Women. I met Layne in 1995, so it was about 2 years before the book was published. And when Layne Redmond, the late Layne Redmond, used to teach, one of the things that she always brought in were these slides. And the slides ended up in the book, which tells the story of this ancient spiritual history of really women drummers, and actually many different kinds of people that were drummers from all over the ancient world, from the ancient Middle East and throughout the ancient Mediterranean, what would be considered old Europe and North Africa and different areas of Africa, and all the way down into India. Basically, Layne had brought together these images partly through her own journeys throughout the Middle East and Europe, and also from different sources and from her teacher, Glenn Velez, that really showcased this incredible, widespread, cross-cultural, ancient history of women playing the frame drums, which are round drums similar to what I have on the wall, but usually with, of course, animal skin back in the day and wood from different trees. And these drums were used in the ancient mystery schools and with the priestesshoods, and basically it was a spiritual technology, and it showed that women were these technicians of these sacred practices. And there was really a rich, deep history that we could talk about that I think can be surprising for modern peoples to really understand really how widespread this culture of women frame drummers was and really is. And so the book really is also an artistic history of art, because these images of what is really an archetypal idea of woman with frame drum. This idea of woman with frame drum shows up in almost every artistic medium, from relief to vase painting, hieroglyphs on the temples of Hathor and Isis in Egypt. It shows up in the funeral goods, in the burial goods, all throughout the Middle East. It shows up in amulet and in votive, in temple, fresco, in paintings throughout the Renaissance. And this idea, again, of woman with drum becomes this incredible artistic, symbolic, mythic, archetypal image. One of the things I love about the book, and I loved about Layne Redmond's teaching, was really how visual it is. It's a very visual way of understanding history. And because there is a lot of written text about women drummers, actually from the ancient days, there's the first named drummer in written history, writings from ancient Mesopotamia, and which is modern day Iraq, and all of that area of the Middle East has a very rich, deep history, of course, of drumming, and specifically women drummers. But this image of woman with drum, one of the things that's so fascinating about it, which is really highlighted throughout when the drummers were women, is that these artists that paint or sculpt woman with drum would have really had no way to have seen each other's work back in the day, which I think really proves, if you start to look through the images, that it is an archetypal idea. And so that's part of what the book showcases. It is also the story of really why the drum was used and how many different types of ceremonies. And one of the things that has really been distilled to me about this idea of woman with drum is that it doesn't mean just one thing. It really depends on the cultural context that we are looking at. So we could look at the drum in the ancient Middle East, and it was used in the ceremonies and the mythologies of Inanna, and it was part of what brought Inanna up from the underworld. And that is a similar tale if we go to the Mediterranean and we're looking at the mythology of Demeter, and Persephone in the ancient Eleusinian mystery schools. The drum is one of the means that the initiate is brought from the underworld. But if we look to Egypt, the drum is used in the birthing temples, and it said that the drummers drum for 40 days during the embalming process. If we go to Italy, southern Italy, there's a whole different mythology. So this idea that we have a similar motif, woman with drum, we have a very pervasive archetype, and yet again, depending on the cultural context, we could pull on all these threads on what did it mean. And some of it we will never know what it meant, but we actually also do have a lot through the book that really describes how the drum was used really as a tool of transforming consciousness for the people, both secular and religious. It's a spiritual technology that in the ancient days was in the hands of women. And that's part of what When the Drummers Were Women teaches us.
Barbara?
That was brilliant, Krista. That's brilliant. I love that Krista. Well, by the way, thank you all for being here. This is just a beautiful coming together and to highlight this amazing book. And this is the new edition for those of you who have that. the old edition, and I have two copies because they fall apart, full of Post-it notes, because I think those of us who read the book are so transformed, just like you said, Jefferson, that your mind was blown. Yes, my mind was blown the very first workshop that I took with Layne, which she called When the Drummers Were Women, and it was March of 1983. And not only did I feel an attraction to this image in particular, there was something about this. Do you have speaker pinned? I'm not even seeing myself show up as a pinned
Oh,
speaker.
you're showing up.
Okay,
We can
good. Thank
see
you.
it. We can see it.
Because I want to be sure people can see these images because they're so
Yeah.
small.
It's nice and big.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Thank you. So this image is what was being used to advertise the workshop, the weekend. And it's Layne Redmond with the Mob of Angels. And there was something that was just deep in me that thought, wow, I really want to do that. And I was already studying the djembe, the West African goblet-shaped drum. And as a dancer, I love the beat. So I thought, well, what is that? That just looked so spiritual to me. And what I loved, I loved the drumming. I loved the feeling of the sistership in the circle that we had. And I loved everything she did. The first night she played all different kinds of frame drums, whether they had jingles on them, like tambourines. If you can see those in the background, it's a little dark. Frame drums without jingles from all kinds of cultures, which was pretty jaw-dropping because I'd never heard or seen that before. And she took us on a guided meditation through the chakra system. She's always been fascinated by so many different things. She was a multidimensional artist and teacher. But what got me the most, and Krista alluded to it, were these images. And it was the second night of this weekend-long workshop. And I felt like these images were entering my psyche and speaking to me on such a profound level that the very next day, and she talked about them all too, and I would be happy to do that with some of these as well. The meaning, the symbolism.
Yeah, talk about a couple when you're ready.
Yeah, I will.
Please.
The very next day, I felt like I was this woman picking up the tambourine, which we had already been learning to play. It was a tambourine. She was teaching only tambourine in the beginning. And so that very next day, after seeing the slideshow, because the book didn't come out till 1997, and so I felt like I picked up my drum and I became these women. And I know now that was just a real deep remembrance within me, and the profundity of the reclamation for modern day women, because these drums were not permitted in the hands of women at a certain point when the warring tribes were coming in. And the reclamation that's taking place now, I think, is really profound. And I think that seeing the images, like Layne said, you cannot be what you cannot see. This one, these are all Layne's images, by the way. And all I have about this one is that it's Greek. However, I always begin my presentations with this one in my workshops because I say, okay, so here's a woman with a drum. And perhaps she plays the drum and sings for her children, sings lullabies. Or perhaps she and her friends sing songs and play the drums together. Or maybe, just for their families or whatever. Or maybe she's actually like in a band who plays for the community around the evening fires. Or maybe she's a priestess of a god or goddess and has a role of leadership in the spiritual community for festivals and rites of passage and ceremonies, community rituals, family rituals. maybe she herself is a goddess. And I think that for those of us who see these images and then take that in the way that I did and almost embody it, we feel a sense of empowerment. And I think that that has become the important thing that I have found with the women who come to the frame drum, who find their way to the frame drum. Many of them don't think of themselves as musicians or let alone drummers, but they are drawn to this work because perhaps they're a dancer and they hear the call because the drum and the dance is a marriage. They're singers, they're ministers and psychotherapists who see the spiritual aspect or the empowering women aspect of this work. They're sound healers because this is such a drum of healing and meditative sound. And perhaps other kinds of healers. They hold sacred space, perhaps, or they're students and enthusiasts of women's herstory, because obviously Layne has done copious amounts of research on these ancient artifacts to piece together these stories, this information. Sometimes the women who come to the workshops are drum circle enthusiasts, and they want to add this to their drumming presentations and their classes and workshops. They're music teachers and, people who are into goddess-based spirituality or matrifocal spirituality, as some of these cultures were. So that I find also very interesting, that it's not, like you said earlier on, it's when we were first gathering before we had the group call, that it's not just about rhythm, although rhythm alters states of consciousness. It's trance-inducing, brings people into unity, and can be used for divination and in the past prophecy, maybe some still do today, and for own personal growth. And drumming in community is a powerful experience for those of us who have experienced it. So anyway, all of these things, and I could talk forever, but that to me was one of the most important things. And the second thing was that these drums were taken from the hands of women. This is a woman who's actually, it's a close up from a vase, and she is a priestess, and she's got a wreath in her hand, which is often, the laurel wreath is often the sign of the priestess. And the frame drum has ribbons and bells on it. And you can actually see, Layne called the dot on the drum the bindu, the compacted energy of the universe. And with the beat of the drum, the universe is comes into its own birth. Wow. And so, the goddess Cybele, that one, by the way, was from the 5th century BCE. So here's an image of the goddess Cybele, and this is Greek. So she is the great mother goddess who beats the drum, the pulse of all life. And she pours forth her libation bowl, the waters of life. And women, I love this image because there's a crescent moon, and Layne taught us that women were the first calendar keepers, because they were tracking their menstrual cycles, which often coordinated with the cycles of the moon. And so there's a relationship between the moon and perhaps even the sun as well, and the frame drum. And one more thing that I'll say, I'm probably going off onto multiple tangents at once.
I like it though.
Her work is so rich.
I like it.
Thank you, Roy. Her work is just so rich and was so multidimensional, like I said, that people are drawn to her work for various reasons. And that's why each one of us who studied with her and then goes off into our lives to teach things My thing was I was inspired by the Mob of Angels, and I created Moonrise, Daughters of an Ancient Pulse. And those of you like Gail Edwards, who's here, a friend of mine, she's in Maine. And this is what I was doing in Maine. And I was so inspired. And Gail would remember this, wouldn't you, Gail? It's just so I was so inspired by that aspect of her work. And each one of us who's teaching in our own way aspects of Layne's teachings, we're also unique because Layne was so multifaceted that we just kind of were attracted to different aspects of her work. But anyway, just to finish up about the images, the last one that I'd like to share, if I can get it clear without the ring light. So this is the goddess Cybele as well. And this one is from Rome in the 2nd century AD. And she's on her throne. And this is symbolism that Layne taught. So she's sitting on her throne and she has her frame drum, and she is the great mother goddess. And she is the protectress of us all. And in her crown on her head, that's like the fortress within which we all live, and that protects us. And she beats this drum, the pulse of all life, that bursts forth every sprouting seed, every birthed animal, everything that we know. She is Gaia herself. And then later on, my added interpretation about the fact that she is drawn on this carriage by lions. And I wish Layne was alive today so that I could ask her what she thinks of my little insight here, is that if she is in fact considered the great mother goddess in this form, then as being depicted, she is being traversed through the universe by the lions. The earth is circling around the sun, which I also find interesting because that would mean that they were thinking of a heliocentric universe or heliocentric solar system and not an earth-centric one, which I find interesting. But I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of my own intuitive interpretation of seeing the lions that are drawing her chariot through the heavens. And so that's how the earth is moving through the heavens. I don't know, but that's my little take. But
Yeah, nice.
So I find these images so enlightening. And the fact that the drums being a sacred tool for the women who drummed and danced and sang in these temples and in the streets of their communities. And then when these other tribes came in, they had to remove these empowering tools so that these women who were leaders, spiritual leaders and other leaders, Lapuchiao, the oldest known drummer, she was a badass. She was like a financial CEO or something in her village, in her community. And yet she played the frame drum, and the frame drum was her emblem. So that's how powerful some of these women may have been. And some of the women who played were probably everyday women. It was an instrument that women played, and like I said, for their families, for their communities. But also priestesses of goddesses and gods are depicted with frame drums, and many goddesses themselves are shown with frame drums. And when the drums are removed from the women's hands, in a lot of places, no ongoing tradition of women playing frame drums was around anymore. And I'll end with this final story that to me, one of the most moving stories was that some women on the island of Cyprus came across Layne's book, and they thought, wow, women used to drum here in ancient times, but nobody's doing that now. Let's bring Layne here, and she'll teach a workshop. She'll teach us how to drum. And Layne did. And I think she might have gone more than once. Somebody might know that. I didn't go on any of the trips to Cyprus, and I kick myself for that because I did go with her on other international trips, but not there. And now women in Cyprus have a drumming tradition, and they are perhaps, at least I know that they were back then, hopefully now. And I think that some of them have picked up the drum again. They may have gone quiet for a little bit, but they have a new contemporary drumming tradition that they're beginning for performances and for rituals, and they're teaching as well. And I just love that. And in the name, in the words of my friend Linda Smith Keeler, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. We are sprouting. And I keep saying this, that I have not seen Layne's work and the frame drum in general spread as much as I have now. It just keeps growing and growing. And how many languages has this book been interpreted in? And how many of us, even in this Zoom call, you're from all over the world. Look at who's here, women who we know from the Facebook community. We are all over the planet, and it continues to spread. So seeds are sprouting. And I think that this lineage, it gives me hope that the lineage will continue, because those of us who studied with her are aging out. And I'm grateful that some of us are still able to teach, and that students of ours are inspired to teach and create their own traditions, because we all bring our gifts and talents to the work and then alchemize it with Layne's teachings, and just it'll continue to grow. So I think that this is really just the beginning, and that the seeds are sprouting. So thank you for letting me share.
Oh wow, so profound.
Brilliant.
New beginnings.
Brilliant.
Hey Roy.
I have one quick question before I even say anything else. That black dot on that drum, you call it the bindi?
The bindu is what Layne referred to it
bindu.
as, like the navel of the universe. And it's the compacted energy of the unstruck sound. And to then strike the drum births the universe. So yeah,
that's so interesting. I don't know if I'm supposed to go next or if I'm stepping on somebody. But
go ahead, Roy, you're up.
okay, but so that black dot is what's in the center of the tabla drum and many of the drums in India.
Yes.
You know, and I think they call that dot between the eye of the bindi. And so this is the bindu. So it seems like there's some kind of ancient tradition going on. But I had someone explain it to me, the nature of the eyeball. The eyeball is much like, there's an art form called scrying. When you look into light and reflected light, like look into the crystal ball and you start seeing pictures. And this is an ancient tradition of divination, of seeing, you know, through reflected light. And the eyeball works the same way. Light comes in, reflects, and comes out, and we get the idea of the pictures going on. And if you look at the eyeball, it looks glassy. It kind of looks like two crystal balls in our head. But the black dot in everyone's eye, I think, is connected to what you're talking about here.
Oh, the
bindu.
pupil. You mean like the
pupil.
pupil of the
Yes,
eye? And
yeah,
the
it's
bindu. Wow,
that.
I love that connection.
I think there's something to do with, like, because light has to react off of something. So with that in mind, so now on this cosmic nature of everything, you mentioned something about the seed. You said something about the seed, and that reminded me of something I read in the book last night. I just really focused in. I went right to like 169 and was talking about the technology of rhythm and that kind of thing, return to rhythm. And it was talking about the eggs in a woman's body. She contains all the eggs that she's going to have to make whatever babies are going to happen halfway through when she's being born in her mother's womb. So right. So they said that your mother was already forming who you're going to be in your grandmother. So like, so like my mom, Dorothy, right? When she was like 5 or 6 months old, she was forming in her mother's womb, and her eggs were forming right there. So they said you were actually 5 or 6 months being gestated inside your grandmother. And they were talking about that's how powerful the matriarchal line is to creating this physical world of who you are now. It said the same is not the same of a man's sperm. You know what I mean? It generates in the moment of whatever, the passion or whatever in the moment, but this egg has a lineage that's profound. So on this profundity, you were going to say something.
I'd like to speak
Yes.
to that though, right?
Jump in,
Because
please.
Layne taught that, and she even did a guided meditation to return to the first egg, because you can trace that back and back and back. That yes, while you're gestating in your mother's womb, your eggs are forming, and so you're actually anyway, the way that you said it, yeah. And so, however, I did read an article, and there are others who, like Ubaka Hill, who also teach that. But I did read an article that said scientifically that may not be true. However, I love the idea, and I love that our eggs, that we are, yes, that when my mother, Sandy, was gestating in her mother's womb, I was an egg. And so, yes, I'm connected to my grandmother in that way as well. I love that idea and that concept, but I think that I have learned since then, and I didn't have the heart to tell Layne this when she was living. So I hope I don't break anyone's hearts, but there are midwives who have heard the same thing. And then there are other midwives who don't agree that this update is
Right.
true, and that the eggs really are formed. So,
but to this update, I'll say this, like this book said it beautifully last night. It said, today we believe in science and we don't believe in religion no more, right? But religion goes back before science, just like chemistry comes out of alchemy. Alchemy is the mother of chemistry, but modern day chemistry will poo-poo alchemy as if it doesn't exist. Astrology is the mother of astronomy, but today astronomy doesn't believe in astrology anymore. So it's like the chemistry forgets the mystery. So I'll just say that to that. A lot of times we believe in science and we don't believe in the mystery anymore. And so continuing on that theme,
thank you
science,
for that. Thank you for bringing
yes.
the mystery in and the
Right. See,
spiritual.
they want you to leave the religion and believe in science. But science is like, it could be very shallow and it changes all the time. So now
Science is always changing.
right.
Yeah.
So in here now, science is starting to get it, right? It talks about on page 170, it says a related concepts in physics today is superstring theory, okay? Which replaces the former idea of the separate subatomic particles with the image of loops and vibrating strings. The frequency as those strings vibrate and the rhythmic patterns generated by their interplay determine how they manifest. And then in the book, it shows when stuff starts vibrating, it starts creating patterns like that called cymatics.
Yes.
Right? Now, those cymatics, to me, is what in scriptures are talking about in the beginning was the word. Because when you see symbols like that, symbols is a form of language. And so I believe when you see these patterns, you're literally looking at the words. Now you're gonna have to get an angel to translate it, but I believe we're seeing the symbols of those words. And it says, to reinforce this, in the beginning was the word, but that word is referring to vibration. It's not like we're hearing out in space kind of thing. Was that vibration, and the vibration was with the creator, and it was the creator. So I wrote down on this page, rhythm and vibration contain and create the pulse of all life. And I'm bouncing off something you said, right? Rhythm and vibration create the pulse of all life, right? So now, if we look at this picture right here, here's a picture of Mary with her baby, right? She holding the baby. Look what's in the baby's hand right there. Hold on, let me see if you can see that. Can you see the rattles? That she's shaking rattles right there. And all the angels around them are all playing instruments. All the angels have instruments in their hands, right? And kind of where my thumb is, wait, hold on, I'm gonna put my thumb right here. I'm gonna put my finger right here. This angel looks like a female. A lot of them look like females, but is holding a rattle just like the baby's holding. So we're talking about, again, vibration, right? And the pulse. So you were talking about how they take the drum away from the women, the same way they did when the black slaves were coming over. They took the drum away because the drum is that communication, it's that power. But there's something about the rhythm, I want to say, that in the rhythm, the word rhythm contains the word hymn, him, It's a hymn going on. And
Mm.
coming back the other way, you got myth. See what I'm saying? We're talking about myths now. So science says the eggs in your grandmother's a myth, right? Because we can't go there. But a lot of times, with the feminine nature of what's going on, science is going to look the other way. So I'll say this. Okay, so and I'm gonna try not to go too long, but in the womb, from the evolution of the sperm to the human body, it goes, it looks like a fish at first, then now it's going to be, it's not an animal, it's a person. It's always a female first. X and X is a female first, and then the piece of the X goes off and it becomes the X and a Y to become a male. So again, we see that feminine principle, but this is not taught or anchored in our society because we're in a male-dominated society. But the fact that the female principle is first is a whole reorientation. So now to anchor what we're talking about, I had a lady tell me, she says, look down into the kingdom of nature. Every kingdom of nature. She says, look in the bee kingdom. And what do you see down there? You see a queen bee, right? She said, look in the ant kingdom. What do you see down there? You see a queen down there. Look in the roach kingdom. Look in all the kingdoms of nature, and you see all queens. She said, now that's telling you something. That's how she left it. Now that's telling you something, right? And so I like to go, I feel like the feminine principle, the womb man, is actually an original principle. So much so that sometimes in Christmas, I'll just leave it like this. Which comes first, Christmas Eve or Christmas Adam? Christmas Eve is the day before Christmas. Christmas Adam, a lot of people haven't heard that, but Christmas Adam is the day after Christmas. And I just say, now that's telling you something, okay? So a lot of times I feel like this is going to be a subject that I feel like I'm going to trace this subject throughout the whole year. This is a subject we could stay on the whole year. And here's my last thought. So they're talking about superstrings. So now scientists start to understand the vibratory nature of reality. This gets down to the particle and wave too. Science is trying to define the particle and put the particle through a slit to see what the particle's gonna do. And while they're looking at it, it acts like a particle. When they look away, it's making a wave pattern. It doesn't make logical sense, right? But it's because of the wave nature of reality. So they talk about the Big Bang. This big explosion that happened in the beginning, creating all these organisms. And I'll just say it like this. What if that Big Bang has to do with something happening inside of a big womb? And the bang is the nature of an orgasm, creating organisms that have orgasms, and so forth and so on. See what I'm saying? There's a difference between a bang, like a dynamite explosion, not creating anything, and an orgasm creating organisms. To me, now we're talking about Big Bang that we got to think about.
That's an
As the lady would
organizing
say,
force.
now that's what we're talking. Now that's telling you something, right? And so you mentioned the word lullabies, and it brought to my mind the story of our art center here in Nashville called Oz. The way that art center started was John Osgarden, who's no longer with us now, but he had cancer. He's in the hospital and he's suffering. The pain doesn't get rid of it. He said a nurse came and sang an Irish lullaby, and the pain went away. Sang an Irish lullaby, and the pain went away. And he said, if art can do this, he promised God, if I get well, I will dedicate the rest of my life to art. So he got better, and he changed his cigar business to an art center, which is still going now. My point is, we're looking at the power of rhythm now, and this book talked about that, how the different sides of our brain entrain depending on rhythm. See, so that lullabies and hymns, they're all founded on rhythm, and we don't even know it a lot of times. Every single hymn is just as lawful as a limerick. They're all framed on solid frameworks of rhythm. So like if I say Amazing Grace, everybody knows the Amazing Grace, but they might not know the rhythm that it's mounted on. The rhythm that is mounted on is called the common meter of language. So much so if you go to a hymn book and you see a C next to the hymn, that common meter will be 8 syllables, that's 6 next to 6 syllables. Now that's a hymn right there. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. 8 syllables. That saved a wretch like me. 6 syllables. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Okay, so that's mounting on something. So Jesus said, when you pray, pray like this: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He's speaking in 8s and 6s way back then. So what I'm saying and suggesting is that rhythm, even when it's slow, has the power of when it's speeded up. And if you study it in physics, you'll see that a rhythm speeded up. Like I have kids. I want to do this in my master rhythm and rhythm hackers class. They got kids on their computer, and they'll do a 3/2 beat. Right, 3/2 means you're doing 2 beats at the same time. Not difficult. Not difficult. This hands in the 3, right? But when you speed it up, it becomes 2 intervals. I forget what the interval is.
Perfect
But
fifth.
you can do 5, huh?
Fifth.
Yes, it's a perfect 5th. So if you do 5/4, it becomes a 3rd, but it's a just intonation 3rd. So we're talking about rhythms going to the melody now. See, we're talking about the mother of things. Like we hear rhythm as tone when it's here. We see it as light when it's there. We feel it as other things when it's there. But in the beginning is this motion that vibrated upon the face of the waters of the deep that our modern science don't believe in no more. And I just go, well, hey, man, I don't put that much weight on modern science, because modern science forgets the mother every time. Every time. Yeah, it's going to put mother to the back of the line. But every kingdom of nature got a mother in there. Now that's telling you something. All right. I'm complete with
Oh,
that.
that's good. I love these rabbit holes. So the point about the bindu and the reflecting, the unstruck sound, I mean, that's a very prominent thought. The nod, N-A-A-D, in Indian music, the unstruck sound. I always get confused from the arahata nod and ahata nod. One is the unstruck, but it's the source. It's sort of when we begin to understand and let ourselves, feel the vibration and the source through us. That's good. That's positive. We become more true, I suppose. And that's similar to, but people don't always focus on that. In the world today, it's also busy. People are not focusing on sort of we forget who we are, where we come from.
Right.
And that's really the same thing with the women. It's just like the whitewashing in our country of what happened with the Black people and slavery and the colonized history of what happened to the indigenous people. And it's really like, not mansplaining, man-washing the history of matriarchal societies. I mean, the books by Heidi Getner Abendroth, the societies were just so different. I mean, the focus was sacredness, creativity, everything that Layne talks about. And if you read the matriarchal societies books, they're very thick. I mean, they're like history books. But when you read Layne's book, you go, oh my God, this is the example. It's not just when the drummers were women, it's when the linguists were women, the scientists, it's kind of like everything that we really have, the nurturing aspect that creates humanity comes from that, and it's been taken away. One of the things that brings me here is why are people killing each other all the time? It just doesn't make any sense. And then when you study and find out that the patriarchy is all about violence and oppression and hierarchy, and that these patriarchal religions, I mean, you can say, yeah, there were patriarchal religions that sort of took away the matriarchal aspects of life, but you see it in this book. It's so obvious in what Layne is talking about. Krista, you haven't talked for a while. Do you have any thoughts there?
I loved Yeah, everything all of you all said. Just taking off on what some of Roy was saying, I thought it was so interesting listening to you speak because so many of the principles are actually really what Layne was teaching, but you're saying it in your own way. I mean, just the idea that when we're eggs, and someone put in the chat that women actually do come in with all of their eggs as, you know, babies. So somebody will have to ask Google G, all knowing, all.
Google G.
Right. And if they come in with the eggs, they didn't just start when they were born. They were gestating in their mother. You know, that's
So
all I'm saying.
Each woman is potentially 3 generations.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
we'll look
Right.
But regardless, we all gestate to mother's heartbeat and blood flow. And so we all gestate to this rhythmic. And I think that's part of what we're also speaking towards with this idea of the first word or the Big Bang, that really underlying reality is this vibration. And part of why so many are attracted to the drum and why it is said to be one of our first instruments is because we have this primal remembrance of gestating to rhythm. And in fact, rhythm is such an organizing principle that really our heart starts beating and then our arms sprout out and we sort of take really to rhythm. I mean, perhaps if we went deeper into that science, that we would find that part of how we actually are growing is because it's rhythmic. And also these larger macrocosmic and cosmological rhythms. The drum reminds us of our place in rhythm. And so much of what was happening in the ancient days, Barbara mentioned women being the first calendar makers in these calendrical systems that were based on the moon cycles. And I'm just gonna have that be my final word for now, since queso is, my dog was going to serenade us. But anyway, this idea of the calendar systems and taking really this idea of humans making music all the way back into the deep Paleolithic, basically prehistory. We organized as groups through music. Some even say, the anthropologists and archaeologists, that rhythm was such an organizing principle that it actually gave humans an advantage over others, and that those that organized rhythm and song in the cave complexes were the ones that actually went out and thrived and survived because we were able to organize through rhythm. And I just, you know, one of the things about When the Drummer Women in Layne's book was that it took so many of us, the students, on a journey where we would pull on one thread. And this idea of this ancient practice of music making in these cave complexes, where we were first also making art. We are so wired, every human, towards our creative principle. And in fact, we were making art before we were storing food. So art is actually primary to who we are, whether it be painting on cave walls or remnants of bone flutes that are 40,000 years that can still actually hold a perfect note. And this idea of the perfect fifth, these different harmonic frequencies that affect us physiologically, affect us neurologically. They bring the brain waves into different states where we have access to higher states of consciousness, or this idea of the divination that Barbara also mentioned, and how the drum was used in that. So if we take off on this journey of music and rhythm from the most ancient origin point, which is across the world. And then we went out as humans on our different migration paths and probably had perhaps drums with us, because we don't know, since they're perishable, being wood and skin, we don't have a lot of actual ancient remnant of the drum itself. But as we've talked about, and you've seen with the images that Barbara showed, we do have the art that goes at least 8,000 years back of the first known depiction of a frame drum on a shrine room wall that happens to have been in Çatalhöyük, which is Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. And they're some of the first agricultural settlements. And a lot of the settlements in Turkey actually, incidentally, coincidentally, happen to be built almost like cave complexes underground. And so part of what this book has taught myself and many others is also to follow the path of something symbolically. And so we're taking off on this journey with the drum as our archetypal symbol. It's really our guiding point. And then if we follow the path of the drum itself, it's like it's teaching us, because the drum is the mother tongue. And why it's the mother tongue is because we gestate to mother's heartbeat. And it goes back to that feminine principle that we all have mentioned. So it's like, the dolls, the Russian stacking where you just spiral down. But I love also just one other point is this idea of the bindu, that unmanifested, compacted potentiality that is really the seed. And the seed is coming from, or the egg, we could say, is from the womb of creation. And that's why in the mythos of the sacred drum, it is the creatrix striking her drum that vibrates the world into being. So from that fulcrum point, and that's just obviously one creation myth. We have in the beginning was the word, the first sound, the Big Bang, or the strike on the drum. They all are basically pointing to the same thing, and that's that the world is vibratory. And so this is why modern people, when we come back to drumming specifically in any musical practice, at any stage or age of life, that we return to these primal origins where that circle is the shape of oneness. It's all inclusive. And that is also the principle of the feminine. She's multifarious by nature. It's the multiplicity of diversity within the one grand unity. And when we get that message, I think to me that is such an important message. We are diverse. We are different because that's the way the goddess makes it. I mean, it's Star Nebula to Dragonfly to, so many different aspects of creation, but it is also under this one unified films. So that's, some of what the book taught me through the trajectory of following Layne's work and also really tracking the path of the sacred drum.
Yeah. Barbara, did
So
you?
many things I
Yeah.
could jump into.
I know, me too.
From
Go
Krista's
ahead.
brilliance and from Roy's brilliance. Well, we were talking, I heard, we're talking about seeds, whether they're human seeds or plant seeds, and gestating to the pulse of our mother's blood. So that rhythm is our native tongue. And then we're born, Layne would say, we're born into this world with the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars, and everything is rhythm. Everything has rhythm. And like what Roy was saying about vibration, quantum physics shows us that everything that we believe to be solid is actually on the quantum level, empty space in rhythm. It's just
Boom.
rhythm. And
Yes.
and as one, I've been really fortunate to have studied with a lot of amazing teachers, and one of them is Randy Crafton, friend of Layne's, frame drummer. And he said that anthropologists have yet to find a traditional culture on the planet without some form of rhythm in its expression, and that we are all truly rhythmic beings, Layne would say. But also Randy said, everything in the universe can be described and explained, not just perhaps mathematically, but through rhythm. And we know the connection of rhythm and math and meter, and think that's what Roy was touching on too. But getting back to the seeds, so here's a Greek vase painting, a close-up from the 5th century BCE. And for those who don't know, BCE means before the Common Era. And they're priestesses playing over vegetation to bring up the life force from the underworld. And as Krista had talked about earlier, the story of Inanna, who descends into the underworld, and it's her priestess who's sitting at the top on the earth's surface, playing her frame drum. And that's the thread that then is able to pull Inanna back up to life. So oftentimes the drum is depicted as something that does bring up life. And it certainly does for us, as every single one of us has had the most intense rhythmic training that we'll ever get by growing in our mother's wombs for however many months you were in there. And, you know, generally 9 months, we like to say, and some people a
10
little earlier,
moons.
but
10 moons. 10
pardon
moons.
me?
Layne says 10 moons, doesn't she, in the book?
I didn't remember that piece.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we were looking at that it's 10 moons.
I love that. And so, you know, we grow to that. And I actually, when I took an African sensibilities and African art music class at, I was no longer in college, but it was taught at a college, and I sat in on the class. I had learned that there were certain West African cultures who also drummed over seeds planted in the earth, and the recitation of the roots of the lineage of the people of the village, because in reciting the roots, and the recitation was accompanied by the drum, and drummers were often minstrels and ministers and storytellers and keepers of the lore, historians of culture. Then the roots of those seeds dig down deeper into, that's thinking that the roots of the seeds would dig down deeper into the earth for stronger vegetation, for, you know, the agricultural society. And there is a connection of the agriculture, the grain-based agriculture of the Mediterranean world. And oftentimes the grain bins were, when they were stored, there would be a votive such as this of a woman with a frame drum, because the frame drum represented life and life force, but also the frame drum is a representation of this cycle of time. And I wrote this stuff down because this, I think, is good stuff here. And there's a connection of grain sieves with the frame drum, and it's believed that the earliest frame drums came from the grain sieve. And, you know, women have been chanting and singing while working, and if it was the women who was doing the harvesting and separating the wheat from the chaff, singing and chanting, and they were probably making little rhythmic sounds with their hands on their grain sieves as well, perhaps. And even today, there are still some grain sieve makers making frame drums and vice versa. But it is thought to share, the frame drum is thought to share a common origin with the grain sieve. And in fact, in the ancient Sumerian language, the name for grain sieve is the same as the name for frame drum. And the Egyptian hieroglyph for a cycle of time, which is what I was alluding to before, it's the same as the hieroglyph for drum, which is also part of the hieroglyph that represents grain. So life and time and seeds and rhythm are all connected. And the sacred rites of the Celtic grain goddess Brigid used a skin tray or a sieve, which resembles the Celtic frame drum, which we call the bodhrán, but there are different, depending on where what village you're in, there are different, as I understand it, there are different pronunciations for it. So I like these connections as well, and the grain-based societies. And I'll end with one last image. This is a Babylonian drummer from 2000 BCE, and it was found in central Iraq along the Euphrates River. So there's a kind of an inside joke that I'll let everybody in on now, among the women's frame drum community. Yeah, there's your frame drum. That the curators of some of these images that Layne was traveling the world and documenting, these sculptures and images, some of the curators would say, well, this is the moon or the sun, some kind of disc, but there was also that this was a woman holding a cake. And the joke was that if you're holding a cake vertically, the cake would be on the floor, essentially. But it's not too far off, because if these were grain-based societies, agricultural societies, then they were making breads and cakes. And there are traditions of, cakes for the Queen of Heaven. Lots of traditions have kind of branched off from that. But, and I always remember it as being this image that Layne talked about, that with woman with cake, but I could be wrong, but it's this or one of the images like it. So there is definitely, a connection of the seeds and grain and rhythm and life and all of that. And that's the kind of thinker that Layne was. And what was so mind-blowing is that she could make connections from various disciplines, and how she even related the strokes of the drum not only to the elements which she learned from Hamza el-Din, the great Nubian musician, but she also related the strokes of the drum to the Sanskrit seed syllables and the chakra system, because she was a practicing yogi. And she would just make connections that just, so the sparks of our brains were all just constantly going. I know it was for me. And that's why, and like you said, Roy, you just open up the book and then you end up writing things in the margins. I mean, that's why I ended up with multiple copies of the book, because there's someone called Shamanic Life who's not muted. Can you mute, please? Because you're on screen. Thank you. That we all write in the book's margins and have these Post-it notes, because they're just, our own ideas are sparked. She was that kind of inspirational teacher, and she was a master frame drummer. She was highly, highly disciplined, and aren't we grateful that she was?
She could have been called Layne Futurewoman Redmond.
Yeah.
Let me just mention a logistical thing or two here. Obviously, we got off to a late start. It's been about an hour. This will be on YouTube, and if you search "When the Drummers Were Women," you would find it there. It will also be on the Planetary Gig Society our website. There are so many things here. I mean, part of this is remembering who we were. And I think it goes back maybe in what our friend Eileen McCusick might say, the ancestral rivers, the vibrational ancestral rivers that go back, the Native Americans, indigenous people, so profoundly understood so much of this. And I watch a lot of YouTubes, and I've been reading a bunch of books about all this. And hopefully, Barbara, as you were talking about, this is a kind of a new beginning in a way. But I know, Barbara, you said you may have to go after a while. We can stay around for a while. We can also ask people if they want to ask questions in a minute, and that sort of thing. Maybe get Miranda on. I have one question I do want to ask, and this may open up a whole nother thing. I just had a serendipitous thing happen, and Krista or Barbara, may either one of you or both may be able to answer, but was talking with a woman who said, "Oh, wait, we do sacred dance because we believe dance solves problems." And that's how, Roy, we ended up with Mr. Bojangles in the Concert for Democracy, because, we need to solve some problems. Maybe we can solve the dance. Well, the universe came out and said, oh, well, you should go to Esalen to take a 5 rhythms dance class, which I did in November. And it kind of answers the question. So any comments, particularly Krista or Barbara,
I
about
would love to, because Gabrielle Roth
dance?
was my teacher. Gabrielle
Yeah.
Roth was my teacher before I met Layne Redmond. I was on the teacher's path with Gabrielle Roth, the founder of the 5 Rhythms
Yes.
dance.
Yeah.
So I would love to chime in on that.
Yes. How does that tie in all
Well, the
together?
drum and the dance are connected, and the song, the in ancient times that was a form of expression and bringing people into communion. And a woman who's here on the call, and Tahea and Natanya, sacred dance students and teachers. So the sacred dance and the sacred drum are definitely connected. And yeah, there was mention, Krista mentioned it, and it's on page 47 for those of you who have your books. Here's a plug. This is my bookmark, Lori Sweet, in my Layne Redmond book. Lori is in our frame drum community, and she's an artist. So this is the cave painting in Çatalhöyük in Turkey. That's the oldest known depiction of a frame drum. And not only did we see the rattle, which was interesting that Roy brought up the rattle, and a bow instrument like the berimbau that we know of from Brazil, but also its roots are in West Africa. Shamanic instruments that it can induce trance-like states. But what I find most interesting is that there are 2 figures, and I'll point to one of them right here, is headless. And that to me speaks to that ecstatic dance that, Gabrielle Roth would say, the fastest way to quiet the mind is to move the body. And that kind of cathartic dance form has a lot of teachings in it, for sure. So I'm glad that you've been exposed to that. But I had read an article when I lived in Maine, in the Maine Times, and I'm terrible at saving these things. So I don't, I'm seeing Cynthia, I'm seeing you on screen. You might need to mute yourself if you're not muted. I guess you are, but for some reason I'm seeing you. But anyway, so it was in the Maine Times, and it was showing an ancient, I don't know how old, Greek vase painting depiction of very simple human figures. And they went around the vase, and they're all standing there and holding hands. And their legs are in different kind of postures, like they're moving. And several of them did not have a head. And the interpretation of the person writing the article, whether they were an archaeologist or an anthropologist, I don't remember, because this was decades ago. And I'm not good at saving articles like that, and I wish I had. But the idea was that people could dance, drum themselves into such higher states of consciousness that they were out of body, out of mind, so to speak, that catharsis, and then would be without their minds. So you quiet the mind, as Gabrielle would say. So yeah, the drum and the dance are a marriage, and I think that these shamanic practices, and on that page, or around that page 47 in Layne's book, she was also talking about, these shamanic instruments that I showed in the cave painting, that the word shaman we think of as being male, but originally it was referring to a woman. And I know that, these days when we're referring to a woman who's a shaman, we might use the word shamaness or shawoman or shawum, but it was originally referring to a woman, which I found very interesting too. But these shamanic practices are part of part of all of this, and rhythm and its power, the power of rhythm. And
Yes.
Roy had talked about the power of music in general and how it affected
Yeah.
that man who was in so much pain.
Mhm.
Reinhard Flatischler has been doing research on the power of rhythm in pain management. And we
Pakatina.
understand the power of rhythm with working with autistic children. My teacher, Barry Bernstein, a music therapist, was working with autistic children in rhythm. Alzheimer's patients, memory care. I used to take my drums into memory care centers, and we would sing songs and play drums and rattles. And people who are in, very different states of their consciousness at this point in their lives are remembering songs from, decades ago, and are singing the song while they're playing a little drum or clapping their hands or shaking a rattle.
Mhm.
And I've worked with autistic children who are in wheelchairs, who are dealing with such disabilities, and yet they can shake a little rattle and their eyes light up. They understand and they feel it so deeply. So that to me is also the power of rhythm and the power of music in general.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, and I
right.
was just going to echo with this picture again. This picture is speaking surrounding the mother and the baby shaking rattles. They're all angels with instruments, and like there's
And
a
it's an egg
drum.
shape. It's an egg shape.
Yeah, there's the egg shape, but again, the position of the baby is in the same dance position. Look at the dance position of the body, and look at the Shiva dance.
Oh, fabulous.
They're in the same position. The arm out, that elbow out, the leg kicking to the side, the leg kicking to the side. See, it's referring to that dance too. And speaking of dance, like when it talked about David, King David learning to make the Ark of the Covenant work, he had to dance all night naked. That his wives were jealous of him, right? But there was that dance thing somehow vivifying and making this thing happen. But again,
Manifest.
I feel like this is a subject for many more times. And when I see the title, when the women were drummers,
When the drummers were women.
when the drummers
were
Made the
women.
mistake.
when the drummers were women, right? I think of when the rulers were also women. And this is a paradigm thing to get in your your
Yes.
mind, so that some of the stories that we see, like the story of Pocahontas, was a time when it was matriarchy. So when she told Powhatan, "Don't kill this new person, don't kill this explorer," she was saying that from the position of a matriarch. Now here's a picture of Pocahontas. That history says she's dressed up to go see the queen. That's what history says. But around the side, it says potentess. It says potentess, which is another word for potentate. She's a ruler. Look what she's holding in her hand. That's a ruler right there. And for people to get this idea in your mind, a lot of times Hollywood will hit important subjects sideways. So there's two movies that came out in the same year. One was Bug's Life, and the other one was Ants. They're animations. But in the center of that story, there are female rulers, and the generals are trying to get the princess and the women ruler to go their way, but they have to work around that female ruler. In both movies, there's a female ruler that's showing you what the center of the society was. So when they were not only just when the drummers were women, but also we got to think about when the rulers were women too. Just like that lady said, every kingdom of nature is really a queendom. Now that's telling you something.
More of a-
Okay,
yeah, more
it's a
men-
paradigm shift.
Yeah, Miranda, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for hosting this. I'm loving all the dialogue so very much. And I think what I would like to share is, yes, all the drumming, the dancing, the singing, the art, the poetry, all of that brings us, focusing us to a certain state of consciousness. So when we're drumming, we're being brought to the present moment. And when we're drumming in group, we're in training with everybody. One of the most important things that Layne taught was the ability to entrain together, that our brains are synchronizing, our body synchronizes with a single, intention. And for these times, bringing the drum into modern times, inspired by the ancients, and using the drum as a way of remembering our oneness with everything, remembering that all is sacred. And you know, and it's very small. In her book, she writes, she goes, you know, she's explaining everything is sacred. And that's one of the main things I'm, you know, getting from the book, is to remember that everything is sacred, and that the drum, as a tool of remembrance, and all the symbology is speaking to that. And so that when we're holding it, we're being a transmission just by holding the drum, transmitting what the circle represents, and then all that we know that the drum represents, that Layne had also taught. And that her book and her work is a reclamation of reclaiming this drum as a sacred instrument. So what Krista and Barbara and all of Layne's students, we're doing this reclaiming work of reclaiming this drum to remind us that we're all connected, that all is sacred, and that when we drum together, we're recreating that oneness that we were inside of the womb. And so each of us are creating our own way, unique way of bringing this back into the world. And many other students are also doing that in this time. Yeah, so I just wanted to, you know, share that little part, that we're all doing this reclamation work and bringing a voice to the drum and to a time period where life centered around a mother goddess, and what we can learn from that and bring that back into our lives. And so all of us are committed and dedicated to keeping Layne's work alive and being inspired by the ancients, and then passing it on. And then our students also passing it on. And so that's what I'm here for. So
And thank you for
Mhm.
putting
Perfect.
it together. I mean, I love this concept of, you know, consciousness, that the drumming and whatever, the music and the dancing and everything really changing consciousness, uplifting consciousness. I mean, I think that's what we're here for now. The indigenous people, you know, there was just the oneness. Everything was oneness. And that's one of the things I've sort of learned about the matriarchal societies and cultures versus the patriarchal, is that patriarchal is all hierarchical, you know, and even like a god at the top. But that's not really, doesn't seem to be the same. I'm not trying to mansplain anything. I'm just trying to, you know, learn and talk about these things so that hopefully we can just make a difference. You know, Barbara, new beginnings. I mean, you know, they're only just, the best time to start is now. People have been doing this for a long time. I am so in admiration of Layne and all the people who worked with her and what she's done, what she's meant to everyone. I'm just really into this whole thing that you all are doing, and we're here to support it any way that we possibly can. Linda, you're on the, you jumped on. Linda's also a member of the board of directors of the Planetary Gigs Society, and she recently has been talking with some other goddesses about, I think, a program, you know, to more programs through Planetary Gigs Society or not, to try to bring the divine feminine more back into music. It's a little bit out of balance. Is that what you were going to say, Linda? I need to ask you to unmute, I think.
Wow,
Thanks,
Linda.
Jeff.
Okay.
There we go. I thank you so much. I've just been wanting to have this conversation for so long. So for me, it's really exciting. And thank you, all you beautiful goddesses and gods, for being here. A couple of things that I wanted to address to help, especially with the science part that we were kind of getting. I loved, Roy, what you had talked about, and that really is a powerful science. It's there again, in science, there's so many different voices, just like there are in the world, correct? And my husband is a scientist, and he will agree that not all science, in his opinion, is correct. So I did want to show everybody a book, The Seven Daughters of Eve. You've probably read, most of you may have already read this, but this is a really powerful book that basically takes what Roy was talking about and expands upon it. And what this book really says is that we are all part of 7 different genetic seeds, African American women. So we are all part and come from 7 African American women. And the science is profound. My husband gave me the book and he said it was one of the most profound books for him. So just want to share that with everybody as far as addressing that issue of the science. And I mean, there are just so many beautiful things that we could continue. And that's part of the series that several of the other members of Planetary Gigs Society and I are going to put on so we can continue this conversation. Krista, I wanted to tell you that when you started talking, I pulled a card for this particular gathering from Megan Watterson's The Divine Feminine. And I asked who was the goddess that wanted to be present in this conversation. And Inanna was the goddess that came out, and she's been mentioned several times. So that's a great synchronicity for all of us.
Another frame drummer. Inanna, another frame drummer.
Exactly. And Barbara, I was listening to one of your talks, and you had mentioned about how during Napoleon's era, they had gone in and taken off the noses of all of these different figures and statues.
Yes.
I thought that was so profound because it's a terrible statement to all of us that we could be disconnected from the rhythm of our breath, right? And that rhythm of our breath, that is our conversation with the divine. And music, really, when I talk to my students, I tell them that music is our way of conversing with the infinite and the infinite's way of conversing with us. And so, and to that end, I don't know if anyone has ever watched the documentary Rumble. I know Jeff has, I don't know, but it's a powerful documentary on the American roots of music and the Native Americans. And so one of the things that they talk about is that when the Native Americans became more visible and doing the ghost dancing, the United States came in and said, we're taking away your music. You can no longer play your music. And that is what happened to women. You can no longer play this music because it connects you to the infinite, to your power. And that's what the legislators of the United States government saw at that time, that the Native American music was connecting them to their spirit, to their power, to their breath, and such of the similarities. And they said that the drum particularly was an insurgent instrument. And they did this to African slaves. They would not let them have drums because they could communicate. And sure, we can communicate, you know, this rhythm, we can communicate with each other. It is the mycelium that interconnects us. This rhythm is the mycelium that interconnects us. And that's what was so profound from Layne. She knew this, she understood this, and all of her work is giving us an opportunity to open our minds and interconnect with everything around this. And like Miranda said, everything is sacred. You know, the Native American culture is that there isn't anything that isn't God, or whatever term you want to use. So I just love this conversation, and thank you all for being here, and let's continue it.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you, Linda, for getting this instigated. Tanya, you wanted to come on and say something, I think, about frame drumming, right?
Yes, I do. I'm so glad to be here. I love getting to see these faces that I've been hearing for quite a while. I'm in Sicily. I just moved here about 5 months ago to study frame drumming and sacred dance, and have the absolute honor of translating a project that was written in Italian about frame drum history. And it's a frame drum atlas of the Euro-Mediterranean area. If I can share my screen, I can show it to you, and it's just amazing. It's hundreds of images and detailed histories of these frame drummers from all over this area. This is a really exciting project.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Any
Is that
comments?
Share
curated
screen?
by the, I have a question, sorry. Is that curated by, her name is Barbara also in Sicily?
Barbara Krishmano, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, she created this through her school, Tavola Tonda, and it's on the Tavola Tonda website, but it's a little hard to find. Yeah, I think eventually it will be a bigger, it will have its own site, but it's like, it's a free resource for people to create, not to create, to show the history of the frame drum, and you know, written in an academic, more of an academic language, and it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty big project. I don't know, I was going to say, if anyone else speaks Italian, there's literally hundreds of entries to be translated. So yeah.
Did you say you had pictures there?
I have, if I can share my screen, I can show you.
Sure,
Yeah.
let's see. How do we do that?
You click on that little wheel at the bottom of your screen. Yeah, there you go.
This is it. This is the frame drum atlas. Sorry, it's not working.
I'm thinking road trip. What do y'all think?
This is where I am.
I love it. I love it.
And this is the frame drum atlas. So like if you click on, this is the atlas, it's even bigger than this, but I'm not able to back it up more. And then, so I've been working on this,
Wow.
it's organized prehistory, 9th century, medieval, et cetera, up till the current day. And like what she says, so there's like 300 entries now. She said this is 1/10 of the research though she's done and has been able to put on the map so far. So like I've already translated this one. Oh, no, I haven't translated, sorry, not this one. This one, I already translated these, and there's just really beautiful images, and hundreds of them.
Wow.
So it's a pretty exciting project.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Barbara, Krista, is there a way to, you know, most of these people, do you have a community Facebook page or something? I guess maybe you do, that you keep in contact?
Yeah, and Miranda is the admin, one of the admins, the queen admin of the women's frame drum community on Facebook. And it's how we often meet one another. Sometimes a student will find one of us somehow on the internet, like you found Miranda on the internet, and reach out to us. And then we may encourage them to join that group because it is a wonderful community for resources and inspiration. And Natanya, I love that that's a project that you're now involved in. That's amazing. She has, that woman, Barbara, she's in Sicily, and she has posted some of her work in the women's frame drum community on Facebook. So
she translated When the Drummers Were Women into Italian. So.
That's what I thought. Yes, which was published, I think, less than a year ago now, like last spring, perhaps.
Pretty recent.
Wow. I want to go to Cyprus too. We can do a planetary music project thing there. Now, Ruth, you, I think Ruth had a question. Let's see, I can find it. Or here's Ruth. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. And you had invited questions, and I think what I'm sitting with is this continuing the idea of we learn from ancient cultures and we, you know, reclaim and recreate. And I, as a dancer, and I've done some frame drumming with Krista, I just wondered if any of you could speak more to this idea of frame drum as changing our consciousness. and then in current times now, how these tools and technologies can help us, bring together and heal the many rifts in our societies and global communities, and how I'm curious about the role of altered states of consciousness applicable to current times.
That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I was reading about that in the book last night, how when you produce rhythms, it helps to change the brain going from alpha to beta to theta waves. You may want to talk about that. That was really quite good, showing how music takes us into these different frequency states of the brain. Did you?
Go ahead, Krista.
Well, yes, like what's Roy is saying about how drumming and being entrained in rhythm can shift our brain waves. And so it has a physiological change and a neurological state change. And from that state change, there's different directions that we can take that or work with that. It's also really the principles behind trance. And there's also scientific, double-blind, fairly well-funded studies about then what is happening when the brain is in those altered states of consciousness or is in different brainwave frequencies. And it's being looked at with addiction support. It might not cure somebody of an addiction, but it's a supportive adjunct. It's like a complementary tool. And also group entrainment, and how when we are all in a similar brainwave frequency and we have access to different states of consciousness, how that can also affect how we relate. And there's even indications, that this is what the indigenous peoples have known inherently or through their own studies and their own long continuum of practice, sacred practice, that we're also looking through the lens of science. So those two things are kind of conferring or coming together in a way where it is a science the indigenous are already working, whether we want to use that word or not. But then also when we're putting people in different environments and kind of seeing how that changes, even things with cognitive decline and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and the youth, ways of bringing rhythm and drumming into different groups where those state changes can actually persist and last for a few days afterward. And if any of us, all you drummers out there have probably experienced how it really does change our state of mind. And there's really, this could be a whole conversation in itself, Ruth, because there's different ceremonies and rituals and, as is mentioned, rites of passage and things. So we can also place it in a cultural context or a mythic or mythological context. That's going to have a different outcome. So it's also about intention setting and also a ceremonial setting, and who is holding that circle with being trauma informed, that language that we're using these days to understand that most every person is having some kind of trauma, and how we are setting the context or the circle for that. And then of course, always looking to true indigenous elders and true indigenous wisdom keepers and deferring to them and really listening as we can to the people that are really holding these lineages from that thread and that continuum. So I think that is such a rich question, and it's such a rich subject, and there's really a lot of different ways that you can study that and enter into the practice. And I think also this idea of trance, and how trance is really said to be something that is happening in, I don't know the exact number, but 98% of culture have some trance-based rituals, whether it be fasting, running for long periods of time, different kinds of, body, working with the body in different ways, of course, the dance, but trance as its own state, and how it has been demonized and marginalized and by certain groups of people when there's colonization, and how those sacred practices are stripped or taken away or forbidden. We're really forbidding people access to these higher or deeper states of consciousness. And that's one of the reasons why when colonizing groups come in, they look for the sacred practice and they either demonize it or they forbid it so that people don't have access, because it is an access into a person's power and connection to source and connection to their higher power or whatever their godhead or goddess energy line is. Those states of consciousness actually open a person up to receive from source, or cut through the mind, where there's just so much information. You can really cut through to these different streams of creative insight. So there's just a lot. I'm sure other people here on the panel could speak to it as well.
Such as the plant medicines. I mean, in the United States, the law was passed, I think, 1978, that allowed Native people to practice their own religions. And part of that was peyote as one of them. Anyway, Roy, did you have something to say? I think you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in relationship to the brain, I know Dr. Kirby was doing some. He was the head of music for University of North Carolina in Asheville for a while, but they were doing different research where they would play different frequencies in the ear, like in headphones. Has this frequency and this has a slightly different frequency, and that would create a beat frequency in the brain. So if we're using golden frequencies, and that would create a golden ratio vibration in the brain, and that was helping to tune the different lobes of the brain, and it was having different effects for people that would stutter or people that had Alzheimer's or things like that. But there again was that music thing, and then relating to and it was creating different states of consciousness too. And also relating to, you talked about deferring to indigenous elders. Stephen J, bass player for Weird Al, he talks about when he was living in Mali and he was studying with the Dogon priests. And the Dogon priests are the ones that told us all about Sirius A, B, and C before our telescopes knew that they were there. And they talk about music. They taught him about music, that music was not only just a scientific principle, it was a conscious force, and that everything that we think is inanimate matter actually has of consciousness to it. And so it said, just like when you play your instrument or something like that, the instrument can feel the music the same way we can feel the wind, but we don't know where the wind came from. They can feel it, right? So they said that music was conscious and knows you the way you know your instrument. Like if I have a guitar and B.B. King names his guitar Lucille. Lucille's is conscious, but doesn't know B.B. King the way B.B. King knows Lucille. They said that's the way music is to us. Music knows us, but we don't know music back. And said that music was what we were talking about, the God principle, the creative principle. In the beginning was this frequency that becomes the music, was this word that becomes the sound, was this thing that rippled across the face of the waters of the deep. So I just want to leave people with a picture of the precision of these frequencies. This is just a frequency right here. And so again, I just want to relate it back to rhythm, because rhythm, when it's slow, has the power of the frequency if it's in proportion. You speed it up and it becomes linear, it becomes the tone. And these two tones, to me, produce this language, these words. There's a whole series of them. The precisions of those designs are like crop circles. They're so precise, and each one is just a different tone. They're not even multiple tones yet, right? To me, that's an alphabet. There's so many different things. There's a language, I think, coming too. So
They look like frame drums. They look like frame drums.
Exactly. It's beautiful, right? But one thing he said, that music, the Dogon priest would always warn him, when you play music, play with your heart. Don't play halfway bored and not into it. Get yourself into it. He said, because it can make you sick if you don't do it right. So there was a respect for music, and that was a warning. He said he always warned them, don't play it halfway, like be into it. Don't Don't do it. Like there's a certain respect and honor to music. Like, wow, man. He said they really warned him about that. So this idea that music is a conscious force, again, going back to science, science would say, oh, we don't believe in the force no more. We believe in science, right? But it's like, hey, you know, you take science makes up its own myths, you know, and I like what the ancient people are saying. So anyway, I just want to add that to it. The precision of rhythm, you know, that turns into a tone that returns into form. So now we're talking about archaeology too, and we're talking about architecture as well. You know, we're talking about a lot of things.
Right. That's how Layne was. She talked about a lot of things and made the connections. And that's why we can have a 2-hour conversation like this.
Yeah.
And yet we've just scratched the surface.
Well, I say part 2. That's what I'm voting. Yeah, Jefferson, your mic is muted.
Thank you, Roy. Ed, this has been great. Any final questions or thoughts or comments? Krista, Barbara, Roy, anybody want to throw anything else out there? There's Linda.
I want to focus on this the rest of the year.
Thank you.
It's really profound. Absolutely. Yeah. Best thing that happened to me last year was finding this book, having Linda suggest this book to me.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for being the one to pull us all together and create this gathering and spark this conversation. And I really appreciate it. And I also appreciate all of our friends being here. Those of you who we know from the women's frame drum community and others who we may not know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in Layne's book and in her work, and for inviting us to come and share.
Thank you.
Yeah, Krista,
Thank you, Jefferson. Thank you, Roy, Barbara. A special thank you to Miranda Rondeau for not only us all, but for the amazing work that you've done over the years with such generosity to really keep Layne Redmond's legacy alive, and also the work of When the Drummers Were Women and the Women Frame Drumming group on Facebook. So Miranda Rondeau is really, she's sort of a heart of a movement and a lineage. So many thanks to all of you, and all of you who need to hear this conversation. I hope we do continue it.
I do too. I second that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much. I mean, this is just so profound. I am very honored to be able to just be part of this, and would love to do whatever I can to help out, because it's sort of a path to peace. It's what we need. You know, we've got maybe we're a little bit out of harmony right now in our world. You know, there's a lot of good things going on, as Victor would say, Roy, but we can really achieve a lot. So
yes, and I think rhythm is at the heart of our technology too. When we talk about algorithms, they spell rhythm with an I, but they're talking about the same thing. So you know, you talk about arrhythmia of the heart. I think rhythm and this thing is at the center or core of that. So if we're going to heal our technology and our relationship to it, our relationship to these algorithms, again, we're going to learn something about rhythm and the hymns that are contained within, you know, and the mythology that's implied in the word rhythm. When you spell it backwards, you see the MYTH is right in there. So I think we're on that level, and it also not heals our self, but heals our technology and helps to show what it means to be human. And as we move into the age of AI, artificial intelligence, what it means to be human is going to mean even more, I think, as we go forward.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to turn off the recording. Namaste. Really appreciate you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.